Welcome back to the Ghosted Podcast. This is a big deal episode, people, because it's episode 100. I cannot believe it's been that many episodes, and I can't believe I have this amazing guest here with me today to celebrate 100 episodes. Mike Lazear, thank you for joining me.
Hi, thank you, Abby. It's great to be on. I appreciate being on.
Right? I mean, we didn't even know when we, scheduled this was going to be the 100th episode. So we're going to do it justice with an interesting topic that I was just doing some research about in terms of statistics and found some stuff that was surprising to me, but you confirmed it wasn't all that weird. So just to preface, we're going to talk a lot today about codependent relationships, codependency in general, how that shows up, how that happens, what it feels like. We're going to really dive into it. And the statistic I found was, let me pull it up, over 90% of the American population demonstrates codependent behavior. So we're going to talk all about that. And Mike, let me introduce you as well, so people know why you're the expert on this topic. So Mike works with struggling singles to break codependent attachment patterns and create healthy, fulfilling, and amazing relationships with both themselves and others. Yeah. So tell us the background. How'd you get into this? What made, codependent relationships something that you wanted to help people break through and focus on?
Yeah, thank you so much, Abby. And this is actually a topic that has become increasingly dear to me. It's a little bit of a long story. I got into doing a lot of the relationship coaching, work with codependency and attachment issues more recently over the last several years. One of the things that I noticed was in my own life, I kept having the same sorts of issues that I would struggle with in my relationships. It would be similar patterns I noticed, whether it was, anxious attachment or some of the, intense feelings and intense connection followed by, disappointment and then the cycle of breaking up and, oh, let's go search for someone else. Let's start over. That whole dance that everybody does. And my background is initially in psychology. And so when I was an undergrad, I was a student at the University of Minnesota. I had a lot of interest in relationships, went a different direction initially, but kind of came back to it, started my coaching path several years ago. And now it's sort of trended that way naturally, where I've noticed these same patterns in a lot of the people that I work with. And so a lot of it is people who have this ideal about what kind of relationships they want to have in their life. They go into a connection thinking, what is this relationship going to get for me? What's it going to do for me? I have a checklist of things, boxes that people need to check off. And by actually doing that, you're already kind of getting to this cycle of, is this a one-way street? Is it a two-way street? If you're thinking, what is this going to do for me? You're expecting someone else to provide something for you, an emotion, a feeling. It's incredible how common that actually is. And I started noticing, as I was working with people, like, I've done this a little bit in my own relationships as well. And so I started jumping more into those behaviors, and it sort of was going down the rabbit hole, reading a lot more about it, reading a lot of the good books. And eventually I realized it's not even so much about the relationship style, like whether or not you choose monogamy, whether or not you want the traditional marriage, go down any specific path. We are taught as a culture through music and movies and the relationships our parents had, our friends, that's the type of relationship you should have. You should fall deeply in love with someone. It's got to be this feeling, this passionate connection.
Oh my God,
Yeah. And so it's alarming how common that actually is. And that's what we're taught is healthy and normal. But that is the root of codependency. And I have always been fascinated, too, by the idea that something is culturally amiss and we're not aware of it. It's just something that's taught as normal. So I'm kind of the message I want to bring to people, and what I want to help people with is showing them that there's a better way and another way. And so, but yeah, your statistic out there too, about 90%, I think it may be even more than that. I think,
crazy.
We all have these patterns, and some of us are just more aware of them than others. And the idea is, there are ways to work through that, even if you're not aware of it. So.
Right. And I guess for people who maybe aren't sure what codependency looks like, can you kind of define that too, and maybe give some examples of how it shows up in relationships?
Yeah, absolutely. So codependency is, just by its definition, is the idea that you are somehow dependent on our partner for some sort of either emotional need. Sometimes it can be financial. That's generally not the definition I like to use. But it's the idea that we somehow can't fully stand on our own as individuals emotionally. We aren't responsible for our anxieties, our depression, our, daily challenges. And we sort of will put that on our partner. That's a very base level. There's a lot more to it once you go from there. But it's tricky because we're taught that that's if your partner's in trouble, you help them, you rescue them, especially men in our culture are taught to be rescuers and, like somehow
Hmm.
women need rescuing or something. I don't know, but this idea, it's everywhere. So, yeah.
Right. I mean, even if you think of, you mentioned movies and pop culture, you think of kind of the storylines of all major Disney movies are, princess, damsel in distress, and,
Yeah.
knight in shining armor or Prince Charming comes and saves you. So with those
Yeah.
relationships, kind of be codependent in a way.
I think most of them are. I mean, I almost want to do a study, just go back and watch all my old Disney movies I grew up in as a kid and be like,
Ah,
oh, is Jasmine and Aladdin, we got a lot of that going on with the magic carpet ride and the whole thing. It's like, this person's going to save me. They're going to make me complete. They're going to give me a sense of purpose. And they become my sense of
right.
purpose. That's a lot of pressure to put on somebody. And so when they
Oh my
become your
God.
everything, yeah, how can you live up to that? So,
Right. But then we also glorify this whole idea of like, this is my person. They're my everything. They're my world. Like all these sayings that you hear and that I hear a lot in terms of how people describe maybe how they want the relationship to feel.
yeah.
But then I also get people that describe it in a very healthy way. Like, I want a partnership where we're equal and we each bring things and we challenge each other, which I like that. But we're taught to be like, oh, it's not real love if this person isn't my whole world.
Whole new world, right? Yeah. I like
There you
the
go.
terminology that you use to your person. I've heard that that's a new one that's come out. It's
Yeah.
the more gender appropriate way of looking at it, but it still has some of the same undertones. It's like somehow this relationship has a significance to it beyond just other people that you meet in your life, which, hey, those are influential and important relationships too. We give special significance to romantic connections. And sure, there's a lot of emotion attached to it. It's a deep connection. There's a lot there. But by
Hmm.
doing that, you're almost kind of like minimizing the impact of and importance of other connections in your life. And at the same time, putting a lot of pressure on that romantic connection. So if they're your person, what does that mean? It means this is the person that's going to do this for me. They're going to support me in certain ways. It's almost implied, maybe loosely. So,
Right. And how do you walk that line of, in heterosexual relationships, men really like to feel needed from what I've learned and
mhm.
noticed. So how do you walk that line of like saying, hey, I want to provide and I want a purpose, but I don't want you to feel like we're in a codependent relationship and you're depending on me to provide this thing.
Yeah, and that is the key to treating and working with people on codependencies, finding where that line is, because it's not easy. And
Yeah.
relationships, yeah, I mean, they do bring out this sort of, obviously, like you want to have, when you have a deep connection with somebody, you want to feel like they're going to be there if you're struggling. They could be a little bit of that rock to a degree of like, oh, I'm having a really hard time. They can hold space for you. And that's the term I
Hmm.
actually really like using. You're holding space, they're listening. That's a big difference than fixing something for someone, but rather saying, hey, if you need to talk, if you need somewhere to just kind of vent, you've had a rough time, I can be that for you. I can listen. I can hold that space for you and you can feel safe in my presence. I think that a lot of men, especially, like you brought up, like they have this sort of ideal or need to like protect or to, become a provider of some nature, especially for a lot of the heterosexual relationships of women.
Hmm.
And that's actually something that I'm starting to delve into and study is like, is that actually caused by nature or is that something that our society kind of says, men need to have this role? Maybe this isn't, as natural a thing as we think it is. Maybe in some ways it
Right.
is. But it's a very interesting topic. And it's like, how can men, we get a lot of mixed messages, I think, ourselves. So,
Right. And even just, as I think men and women, just anyone right now, any person is getting a lot of mixed messages of be this way in a relationship or be that way or be more masculine, be more feminine, be both, do everything yourself.
yeah.
And that was another question I really wanted to ask you about, I run into a lot of people that are super independent. Maybe they're in their late 30s, early 40s. They haven't been married before, but they're like, hey, I got a career, I got it all going on, and they want a relationship. Are those people like set up to not be in a codependent relationship, or do you still see that happen?
That's a great question. And I actually see it happen sometimes more often with those people than in people who aren't that way.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's really fascinating how, if you study attachment theory, especially people who are dismissive avoidance styles, will often kind of throw themselves into their careers. They put themselves first. There's a way of sort of that you can almost tell the difference between someone who's saying, oh, I want to work on myself right now. I'm going to be focusing on my career. I might not have a partner right now, but for a while, this is sort of where I want to be. And, maybe I'm open to meeting someone. that energy versus I don't need relationships and I'm just going to be on my own. I'm going to be independent. I don't need anybody. The latter, I think, comes from the
Yeah.
codependent energy, because then when they meet someone, and I've seen this happen tons of times over the last several years.
I figured you might have some examples.
No, absolutely. And so I've met at least 3 people just in this year who fall into what I would say is the dismissive avoidant pattern. Like, I don't need anybody. What they're really saying with I don't need anybody is like, I really feel desperately like I do, but if I don't take care of myself, I'm going to be in this trap where I'm going to need somebody and I don't want to rely on anyone because people leave me. And that's what they've been taught growing up. So they get really independent. But those people, I can think of 2 examples, not anybody I've worked with specifically, of they haven't been with anybody for a long time. They say, oh, I don't need anyone, or I'm just a free spirit, or I just date around or whatever. And then they meet someone and something about that person will trigger this falling deeply in love, suddenly, passionately thing. And they're all over social media. They post it. They're like, wow, what happened to you? You suddenly met your person. And then
your person. Yeah.
And it breaks up in 3 months and they don't have any mention of it ever again. I've seen it happen 3 times this year alone. And so,
right. It is interesting. It kind of goes back to what we were talking about, like the rom-com fantasy. And people who listen to all the episodes of this podcast, they know this is like my soapbox. And Dr. Brittany that comes on, we always talk about this, how you don't want that when you first meet someone. You're like, oh my God, I'm in love. I never want to leave this person. It's like that fairy tale vibe that sounds exciting, but then leads to something that doesn't work out in the end.
Exactly. And it's shocking how common that actually is. I mean, again, there's that messaging, like, you're going to fall in love. We heard it from our parents, like my parents' generation were just like, oh, when you meet someone, you'll just know, you'll meet the one. That's all the same languaging, that one person is going to make everything. Yeah. So.
And how terrifying that there's only one person on this earth that you might really like to be with. Like, I feel like that is a very daunting task. And I so try to get people away from that idea, because thinking, okay, there's one person that will, that I could be with forever. I just don't see that. I mean, what about people who, maybe they're married for 25 years, get divorced, and then they're in another happy marriage for the rest of their life? So who's to say there's just one? I don't buy that.
I don't either. I like that. It's a really important point. I mean, for all I knew, maybe like there's this one perfect person and she's like in Sweden or something and I'll never meet her. It's like, well, it's hopeless. There's nothing I can do. But yeah.
I guess you got to go to Sweden, Mike. I don't know.
Well, I wouldn't say no to that, but yeah. It's really funny because, to that point, there's this idea too that we should somehow find our person and then partner for the rest of our lives. And marriage culture, there's all that. And I'm not going to knock, people who have had success and have been with their partner for a long time, because it does work. Yeah. But there's this huge pressure in our culture too, to find that person, and they're going to somehow be with us for our entire lives. And it's going to be perfect. And it's going to work out. Maybe we'll have some work and growth to do, but you stay with them. But a lot of the time, we grow in a certain direction, maybe even the first 5 or 6 years after we meet someone. And maybe our partner grows in a certain direction. Sometimes it's okay to say this isn't working anymore. And sometimes you can even break off the relationship and say, it's all right. This didn't work out. It doesn't mean the relationship is a failure. We kept each other company for 10 wonderful years. We had a lot of fun. Maybe we can even throw a celebration for what new journey we're going to start as individuals, away from the relationship that we created, because it's no longer working for us. But our culture says that somehow is a failure. Like, oh, well, they broke up, so they had problems. But that's not always the case. Problems are just people growing in different directions sometimes.
Right. Yeah. It's crazy of us to think, okay, I'm going to meet someone, be with them forever, and we're never going to change. And we're always going to like the same things and enjoy doing the same things together, or have the same priorities in life. I mean, even just in the 5 years that I've been with my husband, we've been married for almost a year. Like, we have both changed a ton. The stuff we like to do has changed. Thankfully, we've found that common ground in different ways and in different parts of our relationship. But, probably besides like financial issues and infidelity, the third biggest thing I hear of why people got divorced is we grew apart, which like we kind of think of like what kind of answer is that? Like, what does that mean? But you're so right. It's like how we change. The only constant is change, right? I can't remember who said that, but you're going to change. And some relationships, maybe you change in opposite ways and you just have to deal with it.
That's beautifully said. Yeah. And one of the reasons people are threatened by change is because there's the threat of the relationship ending. People are saying, well, if they move away, or if it doesn't work out, like in terms of like we lose the common interest or common grounds, then maybe we won't stay together. But it's very threatening and scary to think that the person that we love so much is maybe going to grow in a different direction. Maybe we won't have that connection anymore. One of the hardest things to do in those situations is the whole idea of letting go with love and saying, I want the best for you. I want you to, selfishly enjoy your life and be happy and be the best version of yourself you can be. It is really hard to say that. I mean, I would struggle with it too if it came to that.
Me too. Yeah.
So, but that's the ultimate ideal, that as hard as it is, and as hard as our culture has conditioned us to be certain ways, I think that's a really healthy way to love somebody. I think that's a way to say, I love you for who you are. I support you in whatever way you change and whatever way you grow. And maybe it's going to mean we're going to grow apart someday, and that's okay. And I just want the best for both of us. And it works, for you too. It's like if it's, I'm growing in a direction that this just doesn't feel like it's working anymore. And we talk it out. Obviously you talk and you have these, you try to make things, understand between the two of you about what the reason might be that you're moving on. But yeah, I don't think that giving up on a relationship has to be a failure. That said, it doesn't mean that giving up on a relationship just because things get hard is necessarily ideal either. And there's this sweet spot, that we have to search for.
Right. Because it's like there are points where, if you're in like couples therapy and the therapist is like, well, I think you two should break up, like that might be a really good sign. Like, okay, you've tried, you've put in the work, but every relationship will have its ups and downs. My grandpa actually had a really good analogy over dinner last night. He was talking about like your emotional capacity, like when you're single, it's kind of highs and lows and you're cruising. And then when you get married, the highs are higher and the emotional lows are lower. And then you have kids and, they go and go, and then you have grandkids and et cetera, et cetera. But it's just interesting that, you just learn how to deal with more and more things as more and more relationships are introduced into your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we grow. And that's another good point, because maybe you'll find the person, like, through the kind of older style modeling of, finding the one. Maybe you'll find someone that you feel really excited about when you're 22. And if you had met this person 20 years from now and they had met you, you might have had absolutely nothing in common. It's not just about how compatible you are with the person. It's also about timing. Timing is very fascinating and often understudied part of relationships, because it isn't just about how do you get along with this person. Are you compatible in these ways? Do you have similar financial goals? Do you both want to get married? Do you want children? Are you agreeing on all those things? It's also about like, where are you in your life at this time? Maybe we met someone, but they're significantly in a different stage of life than we are. So there's a little bit of a sweet spot that we have to also understand might be there too. So.
Right. And I see all the time people come to me and I can tell, I'm like, I could like give you the most perfect person in front of you, or 10 of the most perfect people, and you wouldn't even be able to connect with them because the timing just isn't right. Like maybe there's something they need to resolve within themselves or within another relationship that they haven't resolved. I'm sure you see that a lot, that people come to you and they're not totally ready to find someone, right?
Yeah. And sometimes that's the case. Sometimes people are just having, a really rough year. Maybe they're going through a depression, or a family member passed away, or like anything could be happening at any given time. There's no magic formula for this. And I think that's, even like with my current partner, like we talked about this a lot, because she when I had just met her, I was still kind of going through a process of overcoming kind of a toxic codependent cycle with an ex-partner. And I was working through the tail end of it. And I think that if we had met 6 months before, I don't know what would have happened. We may not have connected at all. I'm not sure. And we've admitted that to each other, that the timing was also a pretty big, factor, and, that was able to work out. But yeah, these are not always talked about things. So.
Right. Yeah. And I'm curious too, if you feel comfortable sharing,
Sure.
how in your own relationship do you make sure to balance that you don't verge on codependency?
We talk a lot. She's great because she's been interested in a lot of the same subjects as I have. She has a background in education, not so much on the psychology. So, I mean, I did the coaching certification and all that. So my background's more specifically in coaching, but she has a massive, interest and curiosity in this topic. And so we just love talking about this stuff anyway. And I think both of us also enjoy being a little bit counterculture to what, what's out there that's unhealthy in a sense. So,
yeah.
And a lot of our friends say that we kind of have inspired them to like communicate better with their partner. So I feel good sharing that.
Oh,
and,
nice.
So yeah, but yeah, she's always just been really interested in codependency and the idea behind it. So we're very good at like, communicating about the stuff and feeling like there's a safe space if something's bugging us, to talk about it and say, hey, this is where I am. And I'm not perfect. I mean, I've had my moments even recently where almost in the background, there's that old voice saying, oh, if, maybe they're going to abandon me, maybe she's going to run away or something. And it's instead of like it used to be like this voice, like kind of where I had to act on it, like, oh, you better do something, like make sure that she still loves you, like put little things into the conversation, little digs to be like, oh, I'm going to test her. Now it's more just like in the background and it's saying, oh, I notice you. There's that voice again. I acknowledge this is something that I, used to work through. It's okay.
Right.
I don't need to feel that way anymore. I choose to just move on beyond it. So I think healing from codependency is acknowledging very much that it's not just about magically healing it and you never have these things come up again, but rather how you
Wouldn't
handle
that be nice?
Yeah, oh, it'd be great. Yeah. I think anyone would pay anything for that. But yeah, for me, and it looks a little differently for everyone, because for me, it's usually the abandonment stuff, maybe from when I was a kid. For some people, it looks like, oh, this person was going to cheat on me, or, oh, this person doesn't really want me to be successful. There's any number of voices, or like, oh, she's sad. I better make sure she feels okay. This is one I see a lot. Like, I better call and check and make sure that she's doing well. And like, she's got a big day tomorrow. I'll make sure that I can take her to work and I can do this and that. You're almost like taking control of somebody's life for them against their will and against their permission. And you become sort of this knight in shining armor that by being like this big suit of armor, instead of protecting them, you're actually suffocating the person. And so that's another root of codependency that I see a lot today, more so than you would guess, actually. But
yeah, and it's like it almost feels like it could be coming from a place of feeling like you're caring for someone or being kind, like, oh, let me think of this before they think of it, or take care of this for them. And I guess my question is, could you be in a successful codependent relationship?
Oh, I love that question. Yes, depending on how you define success.
Okay, right. So I was saying healthy, like not toxic and whatnot.
Sure. Probably. I mean, so the funny thing is a lot of codependent relationships seem to just be this exact mix of one person providing a need for another and vice versa. We're like, the thing I think that sometimes draws us and makes us fall in love with someone is some part of us senses that this person could actually fulfill this need for us and vice versa. But that's what falling in love might really actually be about, like where it's like electricity and sparks everywhere. And like there's a subconscious thing like, oh, maybe this person will fix this. So if you define success as like, oh, I met my other half or I met my match, sure. Sometimes these people stay together for long, long periods of time until eventually, if they don't work on it, they just burn each other out with just being triggered all the time and threats of leaving and threats of being angry. And like it turns into really abusive cycles. But I think that, yeah, they can be successful. I think it's very hard for them to be particularly fulfilling. And a lot of people think that they're happy. And then like, so they'll come, like I've had talks with people and say, oh, I have a good relationship. I'm really happy. And then when things start coming out, I'm like, really? That sounds questionable, but I'm not going to say anything. So it's like the whole frog and boiling water syndrome. We don't know there's something better. So
exactly. And what, for people listening, what are some of the warning signs people could look out for to be like, oh, like, let's have a conversation about this. If they think maybe there's some codependent signs happening in their relationship.
That's you're asking great questions.
Thanks, Mike. It's the 100th episode. I really came prepared.
Well, perfect. I love it. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that they can vary quite a bit. I would say one of the biggest things that I see and what I would say to be aware of, like when you're in a relationship, is if you're feeling at all anxious about, I would say anxious or angry or any negative emotion where your partner feels like they could somehow, if they did something, they could solve it for you. Like, oh, if only she would say this to me, or if only she'd make this promise, or only if she would just call me back, or that kind of talk. Because then what you're doing is you're acknowledging that there's something else has to happen, like externally. They have to do this thing to fix my emotional state. So what I encourage people to do is say, how are you feeling right now? Check in with your emotional state. I'm feeling anxious. Okay. Is that something that you can talk with someone else about? Is that something you can work through? Maybe even your partner. That's great. But if you're expecting your partner to come in and if they do this one thing, it'll solve it for you. That's probably a codependent behavior. And that's sometimes the beginning of stuff, and also like expecting, like getting into a relationship and expecting to be financially supported or taken care of. That's another one. I have some, maybe I don't want to say super extreme views on sharing finances and partnership, I don't think it's almost ever good. But that's
I want to
another.
know more about that too. Maybe after you get
Uh,
to maybe another warning sign, because I think it's important.
sure.
Like everyone has different views on this stuff. So,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So, in terms of those warning signs, I think that's maybe the biggest one. And we have to be
yeah.
really honest with ourselves and check it and say, oh, hey, like, am I feeling this? Am I expecting her to placate me and make me feel better? We all have those moments, I think, in relationships. We're human. Some of us maybe more than others. But if you want to move away from codependency, it's like, all right, where is this feeling coming from? What is this feeling? And identify it first. Maybe you've heard of that trick. But then once you're in that space, then you can say, all right, how can I work with this without expecting my partner to make it better? Another thing I would say is the manipulative stuff, like, oh, well, I'm just going to like withhold this information, or I'm just not going to tell her something, or I guess a good example of this would be like, you feel a little bit upset because, and this is big for people who are anxiously attached. Like maybe your partner is feeling like a little distant or something. Anxious people can get really triggered about that. So
Yeah.
their reaction is to be like, well, I'm going to be distant and I'm going to stonewall and I'm going to be icy. That's a huge red flag if you're doing that. Because you're reacting to your partner's perceived space that they might want to take. And it's just a perception. I mean, you can have a conversation. So,
Right. It may not even really be happening if you ask them about it.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Interesting. Okay, these are great warning signs for people to watch out for. Write these down,
Sure.
people. Rewind, write them down. And I did want to ask you about kind of the financial dependency component, because I feel
Sure.
like, in many relationships, there is one person that makes way more money than the other person. Or maybe you have kids and one person doesn't make any money and one makes a lot of money. So, marriage, I guess, is almost like inherently a
Yeah.
financially codependent relationship. So get on your soapbox. Let's hear it.
All right. This is the fun one. Okay. So this is really tricky because there are plenty of circumstances and situations in which it's okay to financially you have some support from your partner and like work together and all that. It makes sense. I mean, we live in a culture where not everybody has it easy. I mean, our economy has, we've gone through all sorts of different things. Sometimes it's hard, sometimes
Right.
out of work, sometimes you have kids, sometimes there's all sorts of reasons why, it makes sense. But I think there's a difference between working with a partner and saying, hey, I'm here to be supportive and help you for now. And we're going to share bank accounts. We're going to share everything. And I'm just going to like spend whatever I want from that account. And we're going to share all of this stuff. Like it becomes a little bit, it robs you a little bit of your sense of individuality and sense of, I have a career. I'm going to go out. I'm going to earn this. I feel like, and okay, let's be fair here. That's not always possible or easy for everybody. Like we all have
Right.
tough, some of us have a tough situation, who's, we're going to raise kids. It's a complicated thing. But as soon as you start becoming dependent on a partner for your financial health and situation, it puts you in a position where you're beholden to certain other things in the relationship too. So if they leave or their growth takes them beyond the relationship, what are you going to do? You're suddenly like, oh goodness. And you might do things that you wouldn't, you might not normally stay with them, or you might not put up with certain behaviors because you need to be financially okay. So let's say that you're in an abusive situation, but you need financial support to live, you're going to stay in that situation a lot longer than otherwise you might have. And so
Yeah.
I think that, obviously not all relationships end up that way, but I think that it creates sort of a power imbalance and dynamic that can create trouble. And I've seen it too many times not to
Mm-hmm.
point it out. I don't want to say all, all is a dangerous word. Like all financial dependent relationships are codependent. I think that it can work, but I think it's something to definitely watch out for, especially the rest of the
Right.
dynamics that go with it.
Oh,
So.
totally. And it's like with all these things, having a conversation about it and communicating about it is so key. If one day someone's just like, hey, we have shared bank accounts now, and maybe you weren't okay with that, so you didn't say anything, like, please say something. I mean, that's like a very basic example. But I think there's a lot of conversations that we don't have in serious committed relationships about tough topics like that, or like what you want in the future, or do you want to retire on a ranch in Wyoming or in a penthouse somewhere else? So I encourage you, if you're listening and you're single, or maybe you just got into a new relationship, like think about having those conversations, or at least knowing where you stand, so that way you're prepared when you get into that conversation.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. And it's all a conversation. Like, I think if you are two people who are aware of codependent patterns and how that can work, if you have a conversation and it makes sense for you to go into a financial arrangement where you do help each other for a period of time, or yeah, it can work out great. I think that overall, if you each have kind of your own accounts and your own situation where you can rely on something that you've done or fall back on, it creates for a relationship with easier dynamics. It doesn't have to be that way. There are plenty of relationships out there where, people share bank accounts and it can work out. But I think, like you said, you've got to have the conversations and not just, there's this assumption in our culture that when you get into a long relationship that, okay, first we're going to start dating, then we're going to move in together and maybe we'll share a bank account, we'll get married, like that whole escalator, and
Right.
it doesn't work. It doesn't work for everybody. Not everybody has the same goals. And if you have those conversations about the financial piece and say, what would you like? What's your ideal situation financially, you know, for yourself? And, this is mine, kind of present, you have a conversation about where you want to be. It gets a little bit, you can save yourself a lot of headache down the road that way. So.
Oh yeah, because if you find out, oh well, I was just planning on you supporting me and me, raising 100 kids, like that's something you want to know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's still, I think that younger generations there's a lot of hope because a lot of us are doing a little bit differently than our parents' generations. I know my parents, like they shared everything and it did not work out well. Their money ended up being one of the biggest reasons it didn't work out. And so, and I think that there's a movement, which is very fortunate for some of the younger generations to kind of step back and say, hey, like, what can I do to make sure that I have my emotional needs covered, financial, all of this stuff. And I can, if I need to, stand on my own. And then it's not so much about what I can take from another person to bring to me, but what can I provide to the relationship? Like what kind of, I've got my needs covered, my basic needs covered. I've been able to do that. How can I provide something for the relationship? And I know it could be a little bit, presumptuous for me to say that because for a lot of people, it's not easy. We live in a tough culture where making a living and all this is not easy. And so I understand that sometimes there's a need to, rely on a partner, rely on other people. So it's a good conversation to have, and it's not always, there's not always an easy solution. So.
And I love what you said too about thinking of what you are going to bring to a relationship rather than thinking of what I need someone to bring me. Because it's so not what people think of just when you're thinking of, oh, I want to find love. I want to find a relationship. Okay, I need someone who's this. Not I'm these things, and let's find someone that complements it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the root of codependency almost. It's like, I'm going to go on a dating app and I'm going to have a whole bunch of like criteria that this person needs to meet for me. It's almost like you're shopping at some dating store for a bunch of traits that hopefully will be in one package and you can just bring to you. And it's like, oh, look what I've got now. Rather than I do all these great things with my life. I'm passionate and excited as a single person. I want to, make sure that, I'm bringing the best energy into the world and I feel connected with myself. Oh, it would be really cool if I could share that with somebody else and like share the journey together. That's a very different energy. And a non-codependent energy, I think.
Yeah. Take notes, people. And if you haven't talked to either of us yet, we can help you through this. And Mike, I want to make sure people know how to reach you, connect with you. Sure. Give us all the ways.
Oh, thank you. Sure. So my website is michaelreid.online. That's my main coaching practice website. I do take 30-minute free consultations. And if I find that we're a good fit to work together, I can work with people on codependent issues. Also, if you're newly single and struggling to stay single, I know a lot of people who are like that. There's this cycle that you get on, sort of like, I'm single, I better find a partner right away. And then you find one and it doesn't work out, like kind of this endless train. I work a lot with people like that to kind of help you to connect better with yourself until you're ultimately ready to find healthy partnership. michaelreid.online is my website, and it's got my social media connections. So I'm on Instagram, Facebook, but you can book with me directly on the website. So.
Awesome. We will put that in the show notes. So if you didn't get a chance to write that down or type it in, go to the show notes and you can go check out Mike's website. And I always like to end these episodes with little words of wisdom. And it is the 100th episode after all. So what words of wisdom did we not get to touch on yet from you?
This is a good one. So I would say if you are a single person and you're on your own and you're trying to look for partnership with somebody, if you could ask yourself, what is it that you're hoping that partner is going to bring to you? And write this down. Go ahead and if you have a journal or anything, like what is this person going to bring to you? Just write a paragraph, put it away, sit down, and then wake up the next morning, read it again. how much of that stuff you think is actually going to be coming from a partner, or is it something that you can actually work on developing in your own life? So,
That's a great tip. Thank you. Great way to end our
happy to help.
episode today. Thank you so much for joining me, and I can't wait to see you soon.
Thank you so much, Abby. It's been a pleasure to be on today.
Awesome. Wow. What an episode, Mike. That's great for 100. I love